All right, today we're going to talk about a band you think you know, Blue Öyster Cult. But trust me, there is so much more to their 50-year story than meets the eye. It's weirder, it's deeper, and honestly a lot more influential than you might realize. So let's dive in.
No, really. I want you to think about it for a second. When I say that name, what's the very first thing that pops into your head? For a whole lot of people, especially if you grew up with the internet, it's probably not one of their platinum-selling albums. It's this.
You knew it was coming. Of course, that legendary Saturday Night Live sketch. Look, it's absolutely hilarious, it's totally iconic, and it introduced the band to a whole new generation. But that sketch, it's just one tiny comical piece of a massive, sprawling rock and roll saga. Today, we're going to tell the real story.
So to really get to the truth of this band, we have to go all the way back. I'm talking 1967, on the campus of Stony Brook University in New York. This is where a few students got together and started something that, right from the jump, was destined to be different.
See, Blue Öyster Cult wasn't just some garage band. It was more like an intellectual project. Their manager, Sandy Pearlman, and their main lyricist, Richard Meltzer, these guys weren't your typical music biz types. They were actual rock critics and writers. So while everyone else in hard rock was singing about cars and girls, they were injecting these heady themes of sci-fi and occult poetry into the music. Pearlman had this grand vision. He wanted to create America's answer to the dark, heavy sound of Black Sabbath.
But man, they did not land on that identity overnight. It was a journey. Before they were Blue Öyster Cult, they started out as Soft White Underbelly. Yeah, a name they got from a Winston Churchill quote. After a bad review, they switched it up, cycling through names like Oaxaca and the Stock Forest Group before finally landing on the one that stuck, a name pulled straight out of one of Pearlman's sci-fi poems.
And this logo, wow, this just perfectly captures their whole vibe. It was designed by another student at Stony Brook, and it is just dripping with meaning. On one hand, it's the symbol for Cronus, the Greek god who is the father of Zeus. And it's also the alchemical symbol for lead, a heavy metal. Get it? They were branding themselves with this incredible level of detail before band branding was even really a thing.
Okay, so they've got the name, they've got the logo, and they've got the sound. With all that forged, the 1970s saw Blue Öyster Cult morph from this weird campus curiosity into one of the biggest rock bands on the planet. Their first 3 records are known by fans as the Black and White years because of their monochrome album covers. And this is where they really laid the foundation. They honed that hard rock sound and built a super loyal fan base, hitting the road with absolute giants like Alice Cooper.
And then came 1976. The album was Agents of Fortune, and on that album was their breakout single, Don't Fear the Reaper. It shot up to number 12 on the Billboard charts. The song was a monster hit, and it turned this weird cult band into legit, bona fide rock stars, pushing the album straight to platinum. And the success definitely didn't stop there. Just look at this number. Over their entire career, Blue Öyster Cult has sold a jaw-dropping 25 million records worldwide. This was no niche underground act. No way. They were a commercial powerhouse. And the hits just kept on coming. You had the stomping anthem Godzilla and that perfect cruising song Burning for You. They became absolute staples of classic rock radio. And on stage, they cranked up the mystique by becoming one of the very first bands to ever use lasers in their live shows. Can you imagine how mind-blowing that must have been back then? But you know how it goes. The 70s were coming to a close, the entire music scene was starting to change, and the band was about to face its most challenging decade yet. The real turning point, the moment that fractured that classic lineup, happened during the 1981 tour. Founding drummer Albert Bouchard left the band, and just like that, the era that had produced every single one of their biggest hits was over. I mean, just look at the contrast between the decades. It is night and day. In the 80s, you have members leaving, a shift to a much more polished, kind of keyboard-heavy sound that just didn't sit right with a lot of the old fans, and of course, album sales started to drop. Eventually, they were even dropped by their longtime label, Columbia Records. Now, for a lot of bands, that would have been the end of the story. They would have called it quits. But Blue Öyster Cult, well, they weren't like most bands. Their story wasn't over. It was just entering this whole new chapter, one that was all about resilience and influence. There's this one description that has followed them for decades, and it just perfectly captures their entire legacy. The thinking man's heavy metal band. They had all the power and the volume of hard rock, but they mixed it with the lyrical depth of sci-fi and poetry. They created something brand new.
And that unique sound, it left a massive mark. You can hear their musical DNA all over the place, from metal titans like Metallica and Iron Maiden to alternative icons like Alice in Chains and Queens of the Stone Age. Their influence is just undeniable, echoing across generations of rock music.
And just when you thought they were settling in as a legacy act, just touring the old hits, they go and do this. After spending most of the 90s on the road, they made a surprise return to the studio. Then, after a 19-year gap, they drop The Symbol Remains in 2020, followed by what they say is their final album ever, Ghost Stories, in 2024.
And that's the truly incredible part. Through everything, they just never stopped. Here they are in 2017, still on the road, still playing. For over 50 years, founding members Eric Bloom and Buck Dharma have kept this cult alive, playing for dedicated fans all over the world. It is an amazing story of just pure persistence.
So that brings us right back to where we started. From a college campus art project to global superstars, from an 80s decline to a legacy of influence that we still feel today, Blue Öyster Cult is so much more than a cowbell. So I'll ask you again, what's the first thing you'll think of now?